December 18th, 2025. A Cessna Citation 550 departs Statesville Regional Airport in North Carolina. 9 minutes later, golfers at the adjacent Lakewood Golf Club watch in horror as the jet passes directly over their heads, impossibly low, before disappearing into the tree line. What followed was a fireball that would claim 7 lives, including NASCAR legend Greg Biffle and his entire family. The NTSB data shows the aircraft reached 4,300 feet, then descended continuously for 7 minutes. The cockpit voice recorder captured instrument failures, transferred controls, and 3 pilots trying to solve a cascading emergency. But one question haunts this investigation. Why did an experienced airline captain bring his aircraft in 1,380 feet short of the runway? On the morning of December 18th, 2025, conditions at Statesville Regional Airport were marginal but legal for visual flight. Heavy drizzle hung in the air with ceilings near 1,200 feet. The temperature hovered around 50 degrees. Statesville is an uncontrolled field with no tower, sitting 45 miles north of Charlotte among the rolling hills of Iredell County. Its single runway, designated 10/28, stretches 6,005 feet, adequate for the Cessna Citation 550 preparing for departure. The aircraft, tail number N257BW, was a 1981 model Citation 2 owned by GB Aviation Leasing, Greg Biffle's company. 7 souls were aboard. Dennis Dutton, a retired Delta Airlines captain with 17,000 flight hours, occupied the left seat. His adult son Jack sat in the right seat, though he held only a private pilot certificate with 175 hours total time, all in single-engine aircraft. Neither Jack nor Greg Biffle, who sat just behind the cockpit, held the type rating required to serve as second-in-command in a Citation 550. The flight plan was straightforward: Statesville to Sarasota, Florida, then on to the Bahamas for a holiday gathering with friends. The Biffle family, Greg's wife Christina, 14-year-old daughter Emma, and 5-year-old son Ryder, settled into the cabin along with family friend Craig Wadsworth. By all accounts, this was a routine departure. Everything looked normal, until it wasn't. At 10:06 a.m. local time, N257BW began its takeoff roll on runway 10. During taxi, the crew had noted a thrust reverser indicator light was inoperative, though the reverser itself appeared functional. The left engine had required a second start attempt. Small anomalies perhaps, but noted nonetheless. The Citation lifted off and began climbing to the west. Within the first minute, Biffle, observing from behind the cockpit, noticed the left engine appeared to be producing more power than the right based on the interstage turbine temperature readings. The crew discussed this briefly. 2 minutes after departure, the aircraft reached its maximum altitude of approximately 4,300 feet, roughly 1 mile from the airport. Then it began descending. At 10:09, approximately 3 minutes into the flight, Dennis Dutton and Biffle discussed climbing higher to stay above the weather. They were operating under visual flight rules and technically needed to remain clear of clouds. The aircraft had descended to about 1,580 feet and established a westbound heading at 164 knots indicated airspeed. Dennis initiated a climb. Seconds later, the situation changed dramatically. At 10:18, the cockpit voice recorder captured Dennis Dutton, reporting that his altitude indicator was not working properly. Additional left-side flight instruments, he noted, may also have been malfunctioning. The aircraft's Garmin GPS unit stopped recording airspeed and heading data around the same time. Then the CVR audio degraded severely, becoming nearly unintelligible for over 3 minutes. Investigators believe this audio degradation indicates possible electrical system problems. When the recording quality eventually improved, the pilot indicated there had been a problem, but did not specify what it was or what corrective actions had been taken. What we know is this: at 10:11, control of the aircraft was transferred to Jack Dutton in the right seat. The plane was at approximately 4,500 feet. No malfunctions were recorded with the right side instruments. Whatever was happening appeared localized to the captain's side of the cockpit. For the Biffle family in the cabin, the flight had become something very different than a holiday trip. Christina Biffle texted her mother, "We're in trouble, emergency landing." Then came an automated SOS alert from her iPhone. It would be the last communication the family received. By 10:13, the Citation had descended to 1,870 feet. All 3 pilot-rated individuals aboard confirmed they could see the ground through the murk. Dennis Dutton had resumed control of the aircraft. The approach to runway 28 was underway. At 10:13:03, Dennis requested the flaps be extended. 19 seconds later, He called for the landing gear. Jack complied, but the gear indicator lights did not illuminate. The crew discussed this, their conversations consistent with the gear being mechanically down, but they had no confirmation. At 10:14:48, Jack Dutton keyed the radio on Statesville's common traffic advisory frequency. His transmission was brief and understated. "We're having some issues here." The aircraft was lined up with the runway, landing lights visible to observers on the ground. NTSB investigators later noted the approach appeared stable in terms of alignment, but the altitude was wrong. The aircraft was below the glide path, too low to clear the terrain, rising toward the runway threshold. In the final 5 seconds of recorded data, the indicated airspeed fluctuated from 107 knots down to 93 knots. The data tells us what happened. The question is why. The most discussed theory centers on the instrument failures. The captain's altimeter was not functioning properly, along with potentially other left-side instruments. In instrument meteorological conditions, or even marginal VFR with reduced visibility, a malfunctioning altimeter creates a deadly uncertainty. The pilot may believe he is higher than he actually is. The ADSB data showed an anomalous spike, with the aircraft appearing to climb 1,374 feet in just 1.64 seconds, a physical impossibility suggesting the altitude encoder was producing erroneous data. If Dennis Dutton was flying a visual approach while occasionally cross-checking instruments that were feeding him false information, the resulting confusion could explain the low approach. He may have trusted his eyes in deteriorating visibility while his instruments told conflicting stories. Supporting this theory, the electrical anomalies, the CVR audio degradation, and the Garmin unit's loss of airspeed and heading data all point to systemic electrical problems. The Citation 550's left-side instruments share electrical buses that, if compromised, could cascade into multiple failures simultaneously. Against this theory, the audio quality improved before the approach, and the pilot indicated the problem had been resolved. The right seat instruments were reportedly functioning normally. An alternative explanation focuses on the crew composition. The Cessna Citation 550 is certified for two-pilot operations, and Dennis Dutton's type rating specifically required a qualified second-in-command. Jack Dutton, despite his willingness to help, lacked the training, certification, and experience to serve in that capacity. His 175 hours were all in single-engine piston aircraft, a completely different world from a turbine-powered jet. When the emergency began, Dennis was forced to troubleshoot instrument failures, manage an approach in marginal weather, configure the aircraft for landing, and communicate on the radio, while his right seat occupant lacked the proficiency to meaningfully assist. Aviation safety consultant Jeff Guzzetti, a former NTSB and FAA investigator, stated bluntly, "This airplane requires 2 trained pilots, and if things go wrong and you don't have a trained pilot, then bad things can happen." Greg Biffle, seated behind the cockpit, tried to help. He was an experienced pilot himself, with 3,500 hours including multi-engine and helicopter ratings. But he was not at the controls, and from the cabin, his ability to assist was limited to verbal observations and suggestions about electrical systems. Some analysts believe 2 type-rated pilots might have successfully managed this emergency. A third possibility, less discussed, involves the final approach itself. The runway at Statesville sits on elevated terrain, rising toward the threshold. The NTSB noted that while the aircraft was properly aligned, it was simply too low to clear the obstacles. Both engines were producing power at impact, and investigators found the throttles in the full forward position, suggesting the pilot may have recognized the low altitude and attempted a go-around or at least try to arrest the descent. But by then, the trees were already there. The approach lighting system begins 1,380 feet from the runway. The Citation struck the easternmost light station first. It then sheared through trees approximately 235 feet further along, breaking them off 12 feet above ground level. Blackened branches on the west side of the tree line marked where the fire began before the aircraft even reached the ground. The jet slid across a road through a fence and came to rest in the blast area just short of runway 28. Post-impact fire consumed most of the fuselage. What remains unclear is whether spatial disorientation, distraction from the multiple failures, or simple visual misjudgment in the drizzle led to the low approach. Weighing all available evidence, the instrument failures likely initiated the emergency return. The unqualified right seat occupant limited the crew's ability to manage the cascading problems effectively. And something about the final approach, whether altimeter-induced spatial confusion, the workload of a partial panel approach, or the visual illusion created by marginal visibility over rising terrain, resulted in the aircraft arriving at the runway threshold 1,380 feet short and too low to survive. The NTSB's preliminary report, released January 30th, 2026, carefully avoids assigning probable cause. That determination will come in 12 to 18 months, but the pieces are starting to align. The investigation will focus on the electrical system, the instrument failures, the crew's decision-making process, and whether a qualified second-in-command might have changed the outcome. There's something else that bothers me about this accident. The pilot reportedly indicated the problem had been resolved before the approach began. If that's true, why was the approach still flown so dangerously low? The CVR transcript, when fully analyzed, may answer that question, or it may deepen the mystery. Dennis Dutton was not an inexperienced pilot overwhelmed by a complex aircraft. He was a retired airline captain with 17,000 hours. He had logged 400 hours in the 6 months prior to the accident. He knew the Citation 550 and had the credentials to fly it, with the limitation that he required a qualified second-in-command. That limitation was not met. Whether this was a casual arrangement among friends, an oversight, or a calculated decision to avoid regulatory complications, we may never know. What we know is that when multiple systems began failing, the human resources in the cockpit were insufficient to manage the emergency. The workload during those final minutes must have been immense, diagnosing instrument failures, deciding to return to the airport rather than divert elsewhere, maintaining situational awareness in deteriorating weather, configuring the aircraft for landing without gear indication lights, communicating on the radio, all while family members sat in the cabin trusting that the experts up front would bring them home safely. Every accident is a chain of events. Break one link, and the outcome changes. Here, multiple links align tragically. The Cessna Citation 550, first produced in 1978, has an excellent safety record. It is a reliable, well-understood aircraft that has served corporate aviation for decades. This particular airframe, built in 1981, had been certified for flight as recently as March 2025. There were no outstanding airworthiness directives that would have grounded it. The thrust reverser indicator anomaly noted before takeoff was not, by itself, a no-go item. The reversers themselves functioned properly. The left engine's reluctance to start on the first attempt is more concerning in hindsight, potentially indicating electrical issues that would manifest more severely once airborne. Investigators are examining the aircraft's maintenance records, its electrical systems, and the specific failure modes that could produce the observed instrument malfunctions. The Citation 550 does not have a flight data recorder, only a cockpit voice recorder, all which limits the forensic data available. The CVR audio quality was poor, requiring extraordinary measures to make portions intelligible. Systemic factors deserve consideration. Statesville Regional Airport is an uncontrolled field. Pilots self-announce their positions and intentions on a common frequency. There is no tower controller to notice an aircraft on an abnormally low approach and issue a warning. The airport serves NASCAR teams and Fortune 500 companies, but it lacks the infrastructure of larger facilities. The weather that morning was marginal VFR, legal for the departure, but deteriorating. Visibility dropped below 3 miles within minutes of the crash. Cloud ceilings lowered to 400 feet by 10:30 a.m. A pilot facing instrument failures in these conditions has limited options. Find visual conditions quickly, or enter the clouds on partial panel. The decision to return to Statesville rather than divert to Charlotte, which has ILS approaches and a control tower, may have been driven by the urgency to land quickly. If electrical systems were failing progressively, the pilots may have feared they had little time before losing more capability. For pilots watching this analysis, the lessons are sobering. Crew resource management matters even, perhaps especially when flying with friends and family. A warm body in the right seat is not the same as a trained second-in-command. Regulations requiring qualified pilots exist precisely because emergencies demand competent assistance. Instrument failures in marginal weather demand immediate, decisive action. If the left side instruments are unreliable, you transfer control to the pilot with functioning instruments. If both sides are compromised, declare an emergency, squawk 7700, and request vectors to the nearest ILS approach. Perhaps most critically, if something feels wrong, don't press on. A go-around with unknown electrical problems is risky, but attempting to land short of the runway is fatal. The throttles found in full forward position suggest the pilot recognized the danger. He was too late. Training for partial panel approaches, electrical emergencies, and CRM under stress could save lives. This accident will likely become a case study. 7 people died in this accident.
Related to who was
Biffle, 55, was not just a NASCAR champion with 19 Cup Series victories. In the months before his death, he flew hundreds of helicopter rescue missions after Hurricane Helene, delivering supplies and evacuating families from flooded western North Carolina. His wife, Christina, coordinated relief efforts. Their children, Emma and Ryder, were by all
that
accounts
plane
below.
crashed while trying to
Dennis and
return
Jack
to the
Dutton were
Statesville
father and son,
airport on
sharing a
December
passion for
18th.
aviation.
According to the federal
Craig
report,
Wadsworth was
the
a friend
plane
who
developed
never knew how to say
multiple
no when someone
electrical
needed
and
help.
instrument
The
problems
golfers at
shortly
Lakewood Golf
after
Club that
takeoff.
morning did
The
not know who
pilot,
was
Dennis
aboard the jet
Dutton,
that
and
passed
his
over their
adult
heads.
son, Jack, were in the
Joshua
front
Green of
seat,
Mooresville
and Jack
saw
had
only
control
that it was
of the
too
plane
low.
at some point.
It was scary, he said. Then came the fireball, the debris scattered across the 9th hole, and the 911 calls describing what no one should have to witness. We owe these 7 the truth of what happened and the commitment to prevent it from happening again. When the final report comes, I'll be here to share it with you.